Hey everybody, it's Dale Jr. back again for another episode of the Dale Jr. Download, and we got a great guest coming in for you. Crew Chief, car owner, Travis Carter's coming to the show. 74 years old. He's seen a lot in this sport. Can't wait to get started and hear this conversation. The following is a production of Dirty Mo Media. All right, so back in the DJD studio, and Travis Carter's going to come in here, and I've said it yesterday, I'll say it again. I've never had a conversation with Travis. Travis is a crew chief that's won championships and Daytona 500s and lots of races. He was a car owner for over a decade. He worked with the Skull Bandit. I mean, it's just he's had an incredible career, but I've never said more than one word to the guy, maybe hey or wave. I don't know. I mean, I've just never had a conversation with him, but this is going to be exciting for me to see what this guy's all about and what makes him tick. And so he's been a mystery to me for all these years, and we're going to get it started. I want to thank Ally for bringing us the guest segment every single week. They do a great job here supporting us at the Dale Jr. Download. They're a great partner for me. They're a great partner for NASCAR, and they're looking good on that 48 car on the racetrack every single weekend that Alex Bowman drives. We're thanking Ally for everything they do in the sport, and they're bringing us another ally to the table, Travis Carter. Let's get started. All right, so Travis Carter on the Dale Jr. Download. I have been really excited about being able to talk to you, Travis, because several reasons, and I just want to tell you real short, quickly. You seem like a guy that don't like his time to be wasted. But as I obviously knew you as a car owner when I was in the sport as a driver, and a little bit before that in the 90s as well. But as I did a lot of work to learn more about the history of the sport, I learned also about your years in the 70s with Benny and all the other things that you'd been a part of. And so you having such a long footprint in this sport's exciting for me. Last week we had Buddy Parrott in here, and he had a similar sort of career, just a lot of ups and downs with a lot of different experiences, different teams and so forth, but over many decades. And his role, how he got involved was so small and minuscule to be able to do and accomplish what he did. He grew and excelled. And so I cannot ever remember having a conversation with you. I can't ever remember us saying more than hello.
I don't think we've ever did. The most I remember about you, I think it was the time that your dad was driving for Bud, and I don't remember those years, but you must have been just an early teenager or something with blonde hair.
Yeah,
and I remember you hanging around there and sitting on the back of that truck all the time. And that's my first recollection of having seen you around.
Yeah, and so I haven't ever had a chance to talk to you. I admire you and people like you. The older I get, the more I appreciate the history of the sport, and the more that I want to know about the history of the sport. My biggest, if I could push a button and travel back in time, I would want to go back to the early and mid and late 70s to see what it was like to walk around in the garage and know I know the sport was simpler, different. It was a lot quieter in the garage back then. Anybody that was in the garage was supposed to be in there. And, man, I'd love to have experienced what it was like. But first off, let's dive into where you're from. Where were you born?
Ellerby. I'm from Ellerby, North Carolina, which is near Rockingham. And I grew up on a farm, tobacco farm, and it's about probably less than 10 miles from that North Carolina Motor Speedway.
Yes, sir. So did you I guess in 49, the track wasn't there. The track, I think they ran their first race around 68 or something like
65.
that. 65.
Curtis Turner won.
Okay.
500 miles. When it was initially built, it had about half the banking it has now.
Yes, sir.
So you can imagine how long it took to run that race. And when they finally the track was complete, prepared to run, I was probably a junior, at high school at some point.
Yeah.
But I remember two or three of my buddies, we sneaked out of school, went to watch the first test session they ran there.
Really?
And, of course, eventually the principal called me in a day or two later and wanted to know where I'd been.
Yeah.
He found out what we'd done, so we smoothed it over.
So you didn't get involved in racing until you were beyond your high school years. So what was it like being in high school, being young, hearing about them building this racetrack? Did you know even what they were talking about doing until you saw it?
Well, we kind of knew it. I remember somebody on a Sunday afternoon, a rainy Sunday afternoon, I was probably 13, 14, driving to Darlington to see that track. That was about 60 miles away from us. The first time I'd seen a big event. I mean, we watched a little 3/8 mile dirt track locally in Rockingham, the races, but I was intrigued, and we would always listen to races on radio. You know, we didn't have TV broadcasts, so I enjoyed listening. So we were excited about that track opening near our home, and of course we were able to go watch the first race. And you know, 500 miles at that speed, you know how long that took to run 500.
Yeah.
It was a long day.
So how did you get involved in racing? What was the first thing you ever did that connected you to it?
Actually, it's interesting. I was not, I mean, I grew up on a farm. Of course, you worked on equipment, et cetera, but I wasn't a mechanically inclined person. But I was associated with and knew a guy who was a crew chief for Mr. DeWitt named John Hill. And John Sears was driving at the time. And John said, why don't you, I'd gone to school over at Southern Pines at Sand Hills Community College for about a year, and I just wasn't into that. So John said, why don't you come up here and look around or help me or something.
At the race shop?
I started, go up to Mr. DeWitt's shop. And the next
Where
thing
was
I
his
know,
shop at?
It was in Norman, North Carolina, which is just north of Ellerby.
Yeah.
Just a little community called DeWitt Junction. Mr. DeWitt owned farms, you know, trucking industry, tire business. He had a lot of stuff going on in addition to owning that speedway.
So he owned Rockingham from the outset.
For the most part, yes. Yeah. And John asked me to come, and I just started hanging around, and I went to a couple of races with him, and eventually in 1970, late 70 or 71, I actually went to work there full time. And so people ask, how did you become a crew chief? Well, at one point it was only Benny and me, because John Hill and they parted ways. So it was only Benny and myself. So that's how I was a crew chief. There was nobody else to be a crew chief. I wasn't qualified.
How old were you?
I was 21 or 2.
Yeah.
He won the championship in 1973, and I was 23.
And you were the crew chief on the car?
I was, yeah.
So, you know, it'll be interesting to ask you this, because in 79, Jake Elder leaves Dad's team, or in 80 actually. Jake Elder left Dad's team about a third of the way through the year, and they let Doug Reichert become the crew chief at 21 years old, and they ended up being fine. You know, everything worked out well. What was it? I mean, what was the crew chief? How was the crew chief role so different that, hey, you got this, you're 22, 23 years old, you can do this?
Well, it was far less complicated. You know, it was just a matter of trying to get the car put together and get some kind of setup on it and get the front wheels lined up, you know, so it kind of goes straight.
How did you learn all those things?
Just by doing.
Yeah.
You know, Benny was a pretty good understanding and knowledgeable about cars, and I learned a lot from him. You know, working as close as we work, just two people, you obviously communicate about everything.
In the early 70s, was Benny in the shop?
Oh, he worked all the time.
He did?
He did 2/3 of the work.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that championship in 73. I mean, that's right out of the gate. You've been working on cars for a very short period of time. Now you're the crew chief. And Benny had the one thing I will say about your race car is it was the most dependable, durable car. A lot of the teams back then, like James Hilton and some of the other drivers that were independents, had to dial back the effort they put in the car during the race to get to the end, to ensure they would finish the race, because they had no choice. They needed to be able to get to the end of the race. But Benny had a car that would run with the front of the pack, but you guys rarely had failures. I mean, what do you chalk that up to?
Well, we just hard work and being particular, and I was always that way. You know, I grew up. One thing about living on a farm, trust me, you learn how to work, and that was my greatest asset. I knew how to work and wasn't afraid to work, because, you know, when I started working for him, I made $75 a week. I calculated we worked probably 90 to 100 hours a week, so that is 75 cents an hour. Now, in 73, I probably been making more than that. But at any rate, we worked hard. We were particular about it, very detailed about, you know, preparations. And he ran good, and we actually won one race at Bristol by 7 laps.
Yeah.
One of those days they'd raced at Daytona. It was like a Monday or a Tuesday, maybe even later than that, and we had to be at Bristol Sunday in the middle of July. Everybody's wrecking and stuff's falling off, and we're riding and going, and Benny said, I got to have some help. So John Utzman came on and drove. You talking about a gentleman driver, that's John Utzman. So John ran for quite a bit, and obviously all he had to do was finish the race to win, and John told me on the radio, he said, you need to let Benny finish this race since, so he can be the winner.
Yeah. So
John stopped and Benny. So we changed drivers twice and still won by 7 laps.
Yeah.
So you can imagine what attrition was like that day.
Yeah. That was there was some interesting times, very common for drivers to get relief. It was the you didn't have very good insulation in the cars. You didn't have any good way to really kind of keep some of the engine temperature and the heat from the engine compartment and the brakes and so forth out of the cars. They probably weren't sealed up very well compared to today's cars. What else would you account for why those drivers were having to suffer so much?
Just heat, and Bristol stress, and you got all that humidity in the middle of July. I remember I think it was 1971 at Dover, Delaware in June, 500 miles. Green flag dropped. The next flag was the checkered flag. Yeah. Can you imagine running Dover with no cautions? Yeah. Bobby Allison won. He was the only guy that was in the car he started in. I mean, they switched like musical chairs. I mean, one guy'd get out, and if somebody else needed help, whoever was on the sideline got in that car. It was a strange day.
There was no tunnels, walk over bridges, so when a driver would have a failure, he was stuck in the infield.
First, second lap crash, long day.
Yeah, and you're just standing around, and a lot of times, I remember this, even in the 80s, a lot of drivers would stand around in the back of pits waiting to be called on.
Waiting for an opportunity.
Wanting for somebody to say, hey, you mind? We need some help.
Yeah.
So one of the most incredible things about that championship year is obviously the race at Rockingham, where Benny gets in an accident early and it ripped the entire whole right side off the car, roll bars and everything. And I can't imagine how badly it might have damaged trailing arm mounts and all kinds of sort of things underneath that car to have that kind of a crash. You can see in photos of the car, just completely opened up the right side. And take me there. Take me when that car comes in on the wrecker. Do you think you can get it fixed?
We had the assistance of Tex Powell, Richie and Les Bars, Jimmy Kowalczyk, who had worked with the Petties and had helped build some cars. Actually, they were probably more responsible for winning the championship than Travis Carter, at any rate. But we were there with a van with welders, cutting equipment, all kind of with anticipation.
You brought all that.
We brought stuff to be able to repair that car. So they drug it in. We kind of made a quick assessment. This guy does this guy does that, this guy does that. Ralph Moody was there. He had brought a guy named Bobby Musgrove, who did not qualify.
Yep.
For some reason, if somebody doesn't qualify for a race, they'd load up and go home.
Yeah.
For some reason, this car was still at that racetrack in the garage on Sunday. So Ralph goes and cranks it up and drives it and parks it behind our car in the garage and said, cut the door bars out of this car.
Wow.
So they did and welded them in, and then we, had to change the rear end housing and all that stuff and got it where he could run fast enough to get points. In the interim, Richard was the next guy in line, Richard Petty. So they had engine failure. When he comes in, I thought, well, this is it. Richard's going to win his championship because, But the next thing that thing's in the garage with the engine. Maurice raises the hood. They think about changing the engine. And when he sees us start to repair the car, he just slams the hood and walks off. And they give up. And but we were able to accumulate enough points to close the deal.
I've been fascinated all them years wondering how you cut the door bars out of one car and welded it. I mean, your car's, it's not like it's just going to fit right in because your car's damaged.
Yeah, Tex somehow managed to do that. Tex was, all those
and
guys
NASCAR was like, yep, go on out there.
Joe Gadzaway was there, and I don't know if you remember Joe.
No.
Joe was there, and I remember we got it finished and let them run. And I remember Joe climbing up on the running board of the truck when I was leaving, because really the thing had like 29,000, had exhaust even in the right door bars.
Okay.
So Joe called. He stands up on the truck, that old wisdom. He said, "Don't ever bring something like that back here."
The roll bar, the original roll bars in there were thin.
Oh, they were
thin
like
wall.
29,000.
Nothing.
Something. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And the truth is, when that car was built, I'm not sure I even knew that.
Yeah, but you learned it.
But I learned it after they were.
No wonder it ripped the damn door bars out of it. Well, that makes more sense. I'm curious to kind of understand what frame of mind Benny might have been in. He's in when you bring the car in, does he think that
well, he thinks it's over, but once he sees progress start and the effort being put forth, and we even had, best I recollect, it's been 50 years ago. I think other people offered to come in and assist.
That's the story, yeah.
So, and that gave him encouragement. The next thing you know, he's encouraged, and he knew he was in a kind of an untenable, dangerous situation going back on the racetrack with that car, because it wasn't in the best of conditions. But he'd make up his mind he was going to do it.
How many laps did the car run?
I don't remember how many we had to run, but we finally, once they radioed down or notified us that we had enough points, he pulled in, withdrew then.
Yeah. So, pretty incredible. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, and that's America's #1 sports book. We have something a little different for you, though. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers that bet $5 get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/Dale to download America's #1 sportsbook. 21 plus and present in North Carolina, full price of NFL Sunday Ticket will be automatically charged seasonally after the free trial. No refunds. Terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. Gambling problem? Call 877-718-5543 or visit morethanagame.nc.gov. You also would go and win the Daytona 500 in 1975 with the Kings Row car, I think. It was white and gold. And then you would go to Roger Penske's and work with Bobby in 76. How hard was this decision, I guess, to leave JD, or Mr. DeWitt, LG DeWitt? How hard was it to leave him, because they had given you basically your whole opportunity up to that point?
Well, I don't know. I went in and talked to Mr. DeWitt because, he was I was from a big family. And Mr. DeWitt was part of the community, and everybody, he knew my family. Some of my brothers even drove trucks during the winter when they weren't doing other stuff for him. So it was like you knew the guy well. But we went in and sat and talked about it, and truthfully, I think I probably convinced him. I said, this is a better opportunity for you because you can get people that are better than I am to come and run your race team, which they did. They got Jake and Waddell went down there to build engines and stuff. He had been building engines, but he got him to actually go to working at his shop. So it was a better fit for everybody. I learned a lot with Bobby, and I certainly learned a lot with working for Roger.
Yeah. So what was your role there?
I was a crew chief for there.
Yep.
And we had a miserable year. We could run good, Dale, but I'm telling you, we had engine trouble. And truthfully, it's to not make this too long a story, at the end, after the season was over, they finally realized what was causing the problems with the engines the whole year.
Yeah.
And we didn't win any races. Of course, he had 2 nasty crashes, one at Rockingham and one at somewhere in Minnesota with a little javelin or something hit the end of a wall head on. And he wouldn't tell everybody how bad he was hurt, but he called me and told me about it, and his foot was broken so bad. And he got to Dover, and he lifted his eye. He said they had to go in and put something behind my eye and push my eyeball back out. And I fixed the first.
His eyeball was in?
Somehow they had to push it back out or some kind of way, he told me. But I was fixed the first bottom pivot pedal for him because he said, I can't slide my foot. You know how the old
can't use a hanging pedal.
And so we made him a foot pedal like that to drive. Really? And he drove all banged up half the year.
The wreck at Rockingham, we flipped that flipped that car down the back straightaway was pretty nasty.
It was bad. That did a lot of damage that he hid from people, I think.
Yeah. That was Bobby was a we talk about, we've had a lot of people in here that's worked with Bobby over the years, and I've always had this opinion. I mean, Bobby Allison was one hell of a race car driver, but he was also his own worst enemy. A lot of times he would get, if he had stayed with Junior Johnson, for example, early in the 70s, imagine the domination that pairing would have continued to have. But he would, he eventually did find his championship in the 80s, but he seemed like the kind of guy that he would get easily annoyed with a situation, and he would even rather go drive his own car, knowing it's lesser equipment, than to have to deal with whatever it was that was sort of frustrating him in whatever organization he was with. I imagine, though, when he was with Roger, it seemed, though, I don't know, you can tell me, he dealt with the frustrations of that kind of upstart team, new program. He dealt with that a little bit better than some of the other situations he was in.
Well, I think, Roger had a knack. I have a great admiration for Roger Penske for what he's accomplished in business and motorsports and whatever. But I think Bobby had a good respect for him. He was building a first-class operation. And, of course, the frustration of not winning races that year, I think, got to Bobby. And at the end of the year at Ontario, we had another problem with it, out of the race with an engine-related problem. And he comes in and parks and he gets out and tells Roger, he says, I'm not driving next year. And he gets on a bicycle and rides off into the infield.
That was it.
So, but I got along great with him. We liked him.
What was wrong with the motors?
What really happened, they used an engine plate, bolts between the block and the water pump. Mm-hmm. So Ford had this odd shape, how they match. Well, the guy doing the work just bored a round hole. So Leonard Wood, at the end of the year, talked with Woody. Woody Woodard was the guy in charge of the engines. Talked with Woody and asked Woody to explain everything about it. And so when Woody told him how he had bored a hole for the water to pass through that engine plate, from the engine block to the water pump, Leonard said, your problem is you need to match the shape of that water pump. He said, you're restricting the water. Yeah. Because the engine would just build temperature throughout the race, and it'd take off running good, and it'd get weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And then we did it the whole year before we found the problem. So that was, could have been a much different season. Right. Had that been corrected earlier.
So Bobby got out of the car, and then Dave Marcus would drive in 77.
And we only run like 10, 11, 12 races.
Was y'all running a full schedule with Bobby?
Yeah, he ran all the races with Bobby.
So why did you dial?
He still finished like fourth or something.
Why did y'all dial back?
I think Roger was frustrated. I'm not sure he had the money. I don't know the details. And plus he had switched from the American Motoring Program to Ford and Mercury in 76. Then he wanted to run some Chevrolets, so we kind of ran Chevrolets sometime and then Mercury sometimes. And
so you moved up to Pennsylvania to do this, right?
I tell people I might be the only guy that ever went from the south to the north to work in NASCAR.
Yeah. What was it like? Was it as difficult as it would be today to run a team that far away from the epicenter of the sport?
A lot of traveling involved, but we still managed to do it, I guess, okay.
Yeah. How was it getting people to come up there and help you?
We didn't have anybody up there that came from the backbone of NASCAR, but he had some good people. He had good qualified people and good fabricators, and he had a couple of engineers in there that they didn't get involved in NASCAR much, but they were there available if you need them.
Yeah. What was Marcus like to work with?
I got along good with Dave.
Yeah.
Dave he was always a little different about his driving style was a little different. He was one of those guys that just wanted to bury it in the corner and try to get going again. And I think it'd been better if he'd learned how to just, how sometimes you need to float it in and let it roll good.
Easy in, hard off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never really knew. I never really had anybody explain Dave Marcus's driving style. I figured as an independent he was kind of very conservative, but to hear you talk about it, he was pretty hard driver. There were times I always found it funny, and you might even remember this because it was hilarious. They go to Dad would go. This was in probably the 80s, and even maybe like 89, 90. They had the Luminas, and Dave Marcus is driving his blue Lumina. They go out to practice at Martinsville, and Dad's out there running, and Dave comes out on the track, and Dad's trying to pass Dave, and Dave ain't letting him go, and they ended up running into each other and tearing their fenders off their cars in practice. And I was like, damn, Daddy, what are you doing? It's Dave Marcus. Why are you and Dave even near each other? Why, just let him go, him let you go, whatever. What both of you too damn hard-headed. And so it kind of makes sense because Dave, he come in here and did a show with us a couple years ago, and I learned that he was very independent and stubborn, right? Kind of hard-headed to a fault, but a hard-working guy.
Oh, he worked. He certainly worked hard.
Very hard worker. What was so your time at Penske? You felt like was pretty influential to your career.
It was overall. I just learned a lot. I learned a lot from Roger. The first time I went to New York, Roger had a Cadillac because he had a dealership there in eastern Pennsylvania. We got in the Cadillac. He and I to New York City in that Cadillac. First time I went to New York City. So that was, you could see how he went from where he, at that point in his career and development to now. So, but just just talked about things and business, and I just learned a lot from that.
After that season, you'd moved back south to work with Junior Johnson. How did all that line up? Junior Johnson had a ton of incredible talent at his shop.
He did, but Herb Nabb, who had been there quite a while, and Herb went on to work for Harry Ranier in the new team they were developing. And Junior called me, and I'm very fortunate, actually, that they did, and contact Tim Brewer at the same time. So Tim and I kind of went as co-crew chiefs. Yeah. But I remember we won the first race at Riverside with Cale, and we were on the way home. Back in those days, you rode big old wide-body jumbo jets, a lot of room. They weren't full. But anyway, we were stretched out. We were in the back compartment. Cale's up in the front first class. So he comes back there and kneels down at me, and he's kind of tipsy, but riding home at night, and he said, eventually he'd always call me TC, but he called me Travis then because we hadn't been together long. And he said, Travis, I got to tell you, he said, man, I was really worried going into the year here. He said, but I'm in good shape. I feel good about it. Yeah. So he was comfortable that he had some people that could get it done. Yeah.
Herb Nabb had worked with them forever up to that point, and then Herb would leave the team and go to Ranier and other things. But you come in as a co-crew chief, and so I can't imagine that happening today, right? You and Brewer sort of sharing these responsibilities. How comfortable were you with that idea, I guess?
We got along well. We never had issues. Yeah. We just never had issues, and I don't know that we didn't always agree, but we'd always, if we had to, we'd go consult with Junior, and he'd kind of make a call, and and at some point I kind of did go to Junior and kind of wanted to be more the senior guy, in which he did do that, but it didn't change our status. Our status. We were still co-crew chiefs, but like if it came down to, are you going to put this sway bar in it? Tim may say, I want this one, and Travis may say, I want this one. We put the one in Travis. Yeah. That kind of final. So somebody had to have the ability to make a final call. Yeah. And that's kind of what we arrived at. Man, I can't imagine
how hard it must have been to get some synergy there without upsetting the cart. Junior's place is pretty historic. Had you been familiar with his shop? I know he was up in the Wilkesboro area, and you'd been with LG and then Penske up north. When you went into his business to go in there and work and saw all the ways that they did things, was it a bit of a different culture?
It was a different culture, but the thing that I knew it had a winning history. And actually in 1971, Mr. DeWitt made a deal with Junior to run Benny at the last race at Texas.
Really?
So I went up and helped him get a car prepared at his shop, and drove with the guy going to Texas, and drove out there and back with that car. Yeah. It ran good. He qualified like on the front row, but it had engine trouble or something. But and so I had been there. That's the only time I'd actually been in the shop.
Yeah. What was it like working with Junior?
Junior and I got along great.
Yeah.
He's he was a no-nonsense guy. He never complained or fussed, but he was straightforward, laid it out. If you had an issue, just sit down and talk with him. He'd always listen. So we had a great relationship.
You'd win the championship in '78, and then as a co-crew chief working with Brewer. Well, in the '79 Daytona 500, you were coming down the back straightaway. I see you shaking your head. I've had this conversation with Donnie, and talked about it with the King and Darrell Waltrip and everyone else had been there. In my mind, probably much like Donnie Allison, not one of your favorite memories, but in my mind, it was probably the most important race in NASCAR history because we had 16 million people watching. Y'all had an incredible race car. Cale was one of my favorite drivers. I loved his style. I loved the way he approached his job.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like you put yourself in the perfect position to win this race, right? And do you when you think about that last lap, is it still as frustrating today as it was then?
It's like any disappointing loss, But the thing that to me is the most incredible is on the fourth lap. The race was the track wasn't really dry, but they had live TV and Bill France was going to get that race underway. So they started the race, and the fourth lap, David and I believe Donnie and Cale all spun out through that mud, black mud in the back. So it missed the line the front end. So he was struggling. At one point, he's the slowest car on the racetrack, and he got 3 laps behind.
Mm-hmm.
So we would come in, and Brewer would adjust that had those A-frames with the strut rods.
Yep.
Brewer would adjust the strut rod. I would look down through the bulge and was looking, at the kingpin angle, and kept put more caster in it. So we finally pulled more caster, worked on the toe end, and finally got it where he could go. Then he could drive it. He made those 3 laps up. And I thought, man, this is just incredible. We're going to win this race.
Yeah, but when they spin off a 2, there's just some slight contact. There's nothing, not that I could tell. I can't really recall there being real contact with a wheel. So going and spinning through the mud and doing
somehow it misaligned that thing because he said, "Man, I can't drive."
No kidding.
So, I mean, I'm telling you, he was the slowest car on the racetrack at one point.
Yeah.
But the cautions were falling. You know how it was, Dale.
Yeah.
People crash more on a good surface typically than they do on a slick surface.
Yeah.
When you got really good grip, it's when they wreck a lot. And they were doing that pretty regularly.
Y'all were finding yourself in perfect position drafting the leader when a caution would come out and Cale would be able to mash the gas and get a lap back. That happened a couple times right at some very lucky moments in the race.
Right.
Late in the race, you guys are sitting there. Basically, it's just between you and Donnie the last 20 laps or so. You've got yourself clear of the rest of the field. And every other race that's ever been run like that, especially in the 70s, the guy that's in second gets himself in position off a 2, puts the run together, goes by the leader, and beats him back to the line. I mean, it happened over and over and over. But in this particular race, Donnie really threw a very aggressive block, put Cale down in the dirt. Donnie's like, I had every right to do whatever I wanted to do.
Well, he told people before the race Cale wasn't going to win that race.
Yeah.
So
why would he even know? Why would he say that? Were they already locked in?
Somehow they had with odds. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But for me, I never had a problem with anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I never had one problem with any driver, other crew member in that business. Never in my life.
The story. So the wreck happens and all that. The fight happens, right? Did you see Cale after that? I
don't recall. I'm sure we did.
There was apparently with the snowstorm, just digging up a little bit in some history that I've done. Apparently, with the weather the way it was on the East Coast, a lot of folks didn't go home. They spent the night in Daytona and get up the next day and drive home.
I think we did the same.
Right?
That's what we did. Yeah.
Apparently, the guy that owned, drawing a blank, the guy that owned Donnie's car, Haas. Cale saw Haas on Saturday before the Daytona 500 and said, "Hey, with the weather, I might need a ride home. You're going by Timmonsville. Could I ride with you?" Haas said, "Yeah." they had a crash, saw each other later that afternoon, and Hal said, I'm mad at you, but the ride's still good tomorrow. And apparently Cale and Hoss Ellington rode home from Daytona Monday, and they were there was a bit of a joke they told each other about trying to stay out of the grass on the way home. It was snow everywhere.
Yeah.
And Hoss said, "We'll be all right as long as you keep it out of the mud." But that was the times back then, and the little stories like that is what really makes it so fun. You talked about it being a simpler time in the garage, how people were easy to find, right? Not that it's a bad thing, but the garage in the 70s wasn't full of autograph seekers and folks with die-cast running every which way after drivers. Your drivers would walk in the garage, and everybody that was in there was working.
Everybody kind of communicated, but you only had like 4 or 5 people on a team car and stuff like that. And it was just like one big family thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, you guys would end up putting it together and still having a couple of good seasons in '79. You stuck with Junior and Cale in the '80 season, which is an important year. But I want to go back to I want to get there in a minute. But I did a big research project on 1979 about my dad, and I know you spent a little bit of time with him around then, between '79 and '80. Dad's a new guy coming on the circuit. Had a really good year as a rookie. Did you even know about Dad, I guess, before?
Well, I knew he I think the first race, was it 77 he ran the first race?
He ran 75 for Ed and Degree at Charlotte.
When did he crash that car real bad at Atlanta?
Atlanta, that was 77.
77,
yeah.
Okay.
He was driving John Ray's car.
Yeah.
Buddy Parrott that we talked to last week was the crew chief.
Okay. Well, anyway, he was a contender.
Yeah.
But I remember it was around the August race in Talladega. I remember he called me, and your dad did, and he wanted to talk about me coming to work there. And so we went down and had that black Trans Am he run around in.
Yeah.
Drove like a maniac. So we go over that old, what's that golf course over on, what's that Mallard Head?
Yes.
We'd go play golf 2 or 3 times. You talking about somebody fish out of water trying to play golf?
I bet.
It was pitiful.
Yeah.
But anyway, I spent time with him and enjoyed that. But
he was a terrible golfer.
Oh, well, we both were, and I never have been able to play. But anyway, ultimately I wound up staying with Junior, but, I might have made a bad choice not going with him. And even and beyond that, a second time when he was with Richard Childers, they called me and asked me about coming to work for him. Yeah. And I thought, I kind of want to have my own team, be my own boss. I just don't want to do that because I'm not sure I would give them what they needed.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had a great respect for your dad, and I always thought he was a friend. I thought he was a friend of mine.
Y'all would battle for the title in 1980 all the way to the end.
And we threw it away multiple times. I remember I was thinking driving over here. I remember the 1980 Southern 500. Not that we could have won it, but I remember that engine, when they warmed the engine up. I always thought I had a really good sense of hearing that engine. And I got down and I listened to it while it was running. And I told Junior and Harold, I said, I'm telling you, this engine does not sound right. But they didn't want to change it.
Yeah.
Run about 20 laps and poof. I guess it had a broken valve or something that I was hearing. And I mean, that's a race, and just multiple times we threw it away. But your dad did a great job. I mean, Doug was a young kid, and they did a great job winning that championship.
Yeah, I know. I did a series on 1979, and I want to do another one on 1980. Maybe we'll get you to come help us kind of pull out some of the memorable moments from that year when you were working with Cale. You lost the championship, but you had 14 poles that year. I remember in '79 you couldn't get a pole.
Right.
You went the whole year.
We did get one at Ontario.
Right at the end, the last race of the year. So the Busch Beer has come on board to sponsor Cale's car and the pole award. You went the whole year all the way to the end without winning a pole. I remember Darrell Waltrip had a bunch of quotes in the papers joking about Cale not being able to win a pole. But in 1980, it was a complete flip. You got 14 poles in almost half the races.
But one thing about it, 3 years running, Roe won an Ontario pole, never could win a race there.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a disappointment for me.
In 1980, you got a call from Humpy Wheeler. and Humpy was going to put together a team, or there was a team getting put together. Not Humpy. Humpy wasn't involved, but they were putting together a team. Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds. What do you remember about that conversation?
I remember him calling me. I said, I'll come down and meet. Went down and met with them. Had a good conversation. I was really impressed with Hal Needham.
Why would you leave this? You know, you almost won the championship in '80 with Cale. Why would you want to go do something that was so outside the box?
Some of it was money.
Yeah.
I mean, I was offered twice the money I was making.
Wow.
You know, and to a young guy, Dale, you know, those days you made $25,000 or $30,000 is what you made.
That's the answer, yeah.
And then, you know, if you start out making 65, that's a lot of money.
Big time.
But then Cale was leaving too.
Okay.
You know, Darrell was coming in,
yep.
and I don't know. I saw it as a good opportunity to move forward, and I guess just like a crapshoot. But I said I'm going for it.
Yeah.
So we did.
So Hal Needham's going to start a team. Did you get to meet Burt?
We only met him once or twice.
Yeah.
So, but I think Burt more lent his name to the
to
effort.
some credibility. Yeah,
just credibility.
What did you know about Harry Gant?
I'd seen Harry. Now, Harry had raced Junior had a couple of occasions. He had run the whatever the second division
Sportsman. He ran the 300 in one of Cale's cars.
Yeah, we had some experience with him. I remember Brewer wanted to take all the lead out of it. And I said, I'm telling you, it's not going to drive good. Well, we need to get it light. I said, it won't drive good. Harry begged him to put that weight back in that car. They wouldn't do it. And it didn't drive good. You know, it's just out of balance. Sometimes if you being balanced is more important than how light you can be. So, anyway.
Yeah, so you would team up with him, and Junior gave the blessing for you to go over there. Y'all were going to buy engines from Junior.
Right.
Which is probably a great decision, to be honest with you, with a new team. And this would become the Skull Bandit, an iconic race car and driver, Handsome Harry. Y'all would race for the majority of the 80s together. Basically, like building this team from scratch. I mean, literally nothing. One of the things that I read about this team is y'all were one of the first ones to start doing running data on your cars. Like, this was in the early 80s.
Right, 82 we had a big old clump of thing mounted in the car at Talladega.
Plugged into a computer,
Plugged in a computer. Oh, man, we fought NASCAR forever over trying to get that approved. But I think that after the first race, it wouldn't let us use it anymore.
But it was helpful.
Hal Needham had been associated with a land speed record, which I don't think they made it official because you have to run it both ways and blah, blah, blah. And Stan Barrett, who had driven it, apparently told him when they made the first run, he said, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't, so they just didn't. But Hal had an association with some good engineering, aeronautical engineering people.
And you mentioned Stan Barrett. He was also the first driver for the team.
He came to Daytona and raced. You know, this didn't dawn on me at the time. That guy never drove a race car, but he raced his first race at Daytona. Yeah. And finished.
Yeah.
No, he actually crashed
on the last lap.
But he went through that whole week and didn't wreck that car.
Yeah.
He did wreck at practice, and we repaired it. But I'm thinking, holy cow, I don't know why it didn't seem just sensational to me.
Yeah, it seemed normal.
He got in and drove it.
Yeah, he raced about half the season or so, and then eventually Harry would become the full-time driver, and Stan would dial back entirely.
You know, truthfully, Dale, I never to this day. We went to Michigan, had two cars in the trailer.
Yep. Because
we used same transporter for both cars. Somebody told me that Stan wasn't coming and he wasn't going to drive anymore. To this day, no one has ever told me why.
Yeah.
I still don't know.
No why. Yeah. I met his son, become friends with Stanton. Yeah, and he's obviously raced in the sport a time or two over the years, but I've actually went out and hung out with him in L.A. many years ago, but great kid. And
did you do any stunt work with him? Did you show you any stunts?
No stunts. No, I don't want. I'm not interested in that part of the world, but not hearing all the stories that I heard about how banged up they get. But stunt guys are kind of like bull riders. You got to be literally fearless.
Hal Needham told me he had broken 53 bones.
Yeah,
in
I
his
believe
career.
It. So what kind of owner was Hal?
He was terrific.
Yeah.
Everybody liked him. And, you know, his vision, this is entertainment. coming from the movie industry. He wanted to do something entertaining. For example, we had at one point cheerleader girls come dressed up cheerleaders. We were running in '84. I think the only year that Dale Earnhardt did not work with the Petties, and they eventually beat us for the championship with Terry Labonte at Charlotte in the fall. Hal has this Cadillac limo drive-in. You know these guys down in the island that gets out this white stuff. These are big old guys and they talk funny.
Yeah.
I don't remember what they call it. Voodoo Man.
Yeah.
He has a drive in the garage. This Voodoo Man gets out.
Like a stunt.
Yeah, and Dale Earnhardt goes berserk.
Really?
He goes to Dick Beatty, whoever's in charge down there, and said, "You get this guy out of here. You got to get this guy." This thing really shook him up.
Yeah, I bet.
But Hal just, he was a guy of entertainment.
Yeah.
He wanted to add something, entertainment value to it.
So, you end up kind of developing that iconic program with the Skull Bandit and Harry Gant, and y'all had a lot of fun. Did a lot of good. That did a lot of good.
And won a few races.
Yeah, won a few races.
A lot less than we should have. But
I know. Run second a million times, it seemed like. I remember that was a big deal, Harry trying to get that first win. Kept coming in second. In 1989, you decided to purchase Mach 1 Racing and start your own team. Why would you want to get into ownership?
That was always my goal.
Yeah.
When I was working for Mr. DeWitt, that was kind of I said, well, I can't be a driver. And I remember Buddy Baker told me early on, he said, you need to do what you do because you're going to have a lot better career, a chance to have a better career than you would a driver. So that was good advice. But anyway, I always wanted to kind of work the way to be an owner.
What was the Mach 1 team? Who owned that?
That was the old Skull Bandit team.
Really?
And
so Hal sold the team to you?
He sold it, yeah. Well, he didn't sell it to me. He sold it to a guy named Bill Edwards. Bill Edwards actually owned it in '89, and then I took over stuff in 1990.
Yep. You got sponsorship help from Junior? And a few
Junior helped us some.
Kind of steered some people toward it?
But Junior helped me get this banquet food sponsorship that came on in 1990.
Gotcha. Junior would do things like that a lot that people never would hear about.
Right.
He helped kind of put Childress and Dad together.
Yeah.
And he was always, it feels like that he was always sort of at the table, even though him and NASCAR were at complete odds most of the time. It seemed like that he was always behind the scenes trying to help things keep going in the right direction.
Well, I mean, you probably know it, but, I mean, he's the one that took R.J. Reynolds to NASCAR to be the series sponsor. I mean, they went to him talking about sponsoring 4 or 5 cars, and he said you need to talk about look at sponsoring the series.
Yeah.
And truthfully, between you and I, and you probably know it, that saved NASCAR.
Yeah.
R.J. Reynolds and their sponsorship with Winston saved them.
Yeah. So, pretty incredible. You'd hire Butch Miller, an incredible short track racer from the ASA ranks up north. Guy won anything he got behind the wheel of up there driving those Camaros, and ran 23 races with sponsorship from Winn-Dixie. How come that I've always wondered why Butch didn't work out.
I'm not sure. I just think our cars were just too far off.
Yeah.
Because I knew that guy could drive, and I still think I just don't think we did something. And later, deeper into the season, you'd start finding little problems with your car that you didn't know existed.
Yeah. When you're the owner, are you still the crew chief?
I was then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How difficult was it to manage all that?
Well, there wasn't a whole lot to do. You know, you didn't have, 10, 12 employees and things like that. And I always liked to work. I was one of those that's probably too micromanaged. I mean, I always felt like, man, if I do it, I'm going to do it better than the next guy.
Yep.
You
ended up putting Rick Mast in the car to finish out the year. Jimmy Spencer would be the driver in 91 with Banquet Foods. The team shut down temporarily in 92.
Yeah, we just ran out of money.
Yeah. And then you would go work with Bud Moore.
Yeah, Bud Moore some, yeah.
All right. Hut Strickland and Camel Cigarettes came on board in '94, so you get the team fired back up.
Well, that's a different team. It's a new team.
Really, you created this whole new team.
Well, between Wayne Robertson and Junior was kind of, they went to Junior and Junior Sepp got him, again, and he said, you need to get Travis to come and do this team, and so we did that. And that's.
Were you part owner in that as well?
I was, yeah. And then, and after a year or two, I bought Junior's interest out. A lot of people always thought Wayne owned. Wayne didn't own any of that team.
Yeah.
Everything was above board. I mean, he was strictly a SME guy that provided the money and et cetera, et cetera. But Junior did own part of it initially, but I bought him out after 2 years, I believe.
So Camel Cigarettes, an iconic race car. Jimmy was a driver. It seemed like drove forever for you. Winston would come on board at one point as well. I thought that y'all overachieved. Had some really, really strong runs in those cars.
We just couldn't win. As an owner, the only race I ever won as a car owner was whatever that companion race is to the Winston. What do they call it now? The All-Star race. Yeah.
Yep.
That's the only race we ever won as an owner. And man, I was disappointed because we had cars to win. We should have won some other races. We just couldn't do it.
Well, I mean, there were some times when that car really had good speed.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
In the latter years after we came on with Carl Austin, I had Kmart. We had some cars that would go, but we just couldn't win races.
Yeah. So Jimmy Spencer gets replaced by Joe Nemechek in 2001. Between these seasons, Kmart goes into bankruptcy. That put the team in a bit of a bind.
In 2002, right after we'd hired Joe, we get a call from one of the vice presidents. He called me first, and then he called Carl Haas, who was my partner. And he said, we're going to have to stop. We can't go whatever. And then he called back the next day, and he said, well, we didn't realize we'd paid you X number of dollars. You got to run the first 4 races for us. So that was kind of the end of the deal.
So before all that, though, you did have Darrell Waltrip kind of finish out his career driving your cars. And that was that was kind of you had 2 race cars on the racetrack. Darrell driving one, I think Todd and I.
Well, actually, Jimmy drove, and then Todd actually took over for Darrell after Darrell left.
Yeah. So Jimmy and Darrell were teammates.
Yeah.
How was that working out?
They did okay.
It seemed like a good pairing.
Well, they did okay. I mean, but Darrell was so different. Jimmy would drive whatever you got him, and Darrell, we just never could get him comfortable or satisfied or whatever. We just, he wanted hired the people that your dad had down there working with Steve Park and him and to come up to work, and that didn't work out. I mean, we just did everything under the sun. I told people we probably spent 50% more money on Darrell's team we did Jimmy's, just trying to get him going. Something that he could do. We just never could get it worked out.
Yeah. And so Todd would take over, and Todd would actually be able to get some pace out of the car. He's a little hot shoe driver. Every time Todd got into something, he seemed to go pretty fast.
Well, he'd make it go fast.
Yeah.
I mean, he might hit something with it, but he'd make the darn thing go fast. And sometimes I think he'd try to do it just to make Darrell look bad or something. Yeah. But and that's not I'm not criticizing it, but that's not the best way to approach things. You know that.
Yeah. Again, Joe Nemechek would get in the car, and then you'd have some struggle with the partnerships. You had a lot of different drivers kind of coming and going. Todd and Jeff would split the ride at one point. And then Haas and Carter would merge with Sam. How do you
Sam Bell-Navis.
Yeah.
The Haas, Carl was out at the end of 2002.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Johnson, who worked with Rick, and I'm sure you remember him, super nice guy.
Yep.
Put Sam and I together. And actually, Jimmy called and said, this might be an opportunity because he knew I was in trouble and was out of business.
Yeah.
So anyway, Sam and I ran in 2003 and had the Army National Guard. And
54.
And that 54,
Todd drove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason number 54, if people don't know, there are 54 Guard units.
Oh, really?
That's why they wanted number 54.
Yeah. Well, that was a nice sponsor, but and a good-looking race car. I remember that him and Kenny Wallace having a hell of a wreck off too at Michigan.
Oh, Lord of mercy!
But you made one more attempt at forming an alliance with Torque Speed. Who's Torque Speed?
That was a group out Great Britain that wanted to do something with it. He
Really?
came over here and he wanted to do all this press conference and all this. And I said, man, we need to get somebody to put the money where their mouth is. And I didn't push that. And that was really all about much to do about nothing.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So I was done at the end of 2003 when the National Guard went to Jack Roush.
That was it.
That was it. I said, I said, I can't compete with these guys. I think I'm probably done. And that's pretty much it.
Man. So one of the cars, though, that I always one of the races that I always think about when I think about you is the Daytona 500, I believe is 1989. The last time they ran the big Monte Carlos down there, you showed up with a white car, number 66.
That was that Mach 1 car.
With Rick Mast driving the car. I think you'd had I think y'all were sponsorless.
Right.
And somehow went down there and nearly won that race. Had Darrell Waltrip not had that extra gas tank or whatever, that extra 5 foot of gas line in that tide ride, Dad or Rick Mast would be Daytona 500 champions in that race. Talk about that weekend, because I would just want to say, man, I feel like, as for you as a car owner, y'all were this. It became this Cinderella story that I even as a kid or even as a young boy, you instantly sort of pulled for that team, because I loved Jimmy Means. I loved the independent. I loved seeing somebody do all they could with very, very little, because I knew what Dad had. I knew what was in his hauler. I knew what was at their race shop. And so I love to see these other people try to make something out of nothing. And you were watching a team go down there, run up front with some of the biggest teams without a decal on the car. And it was easy to want to pull for y'all. And Rick was a great story too. A really, hard luck racer trying to get opportunity, finally getting him an opportunity in a cup level ride. And so talk about that weekend when y'all showed up.
First of all, we went and tested with him, struggled, came home, did some work with the engine, went back and got it where it could run good. But we also had we run on Hoosier tires, which was a little bit of an advantage. But I always tell people, of all the years I went to Daytona, and you know how stressful that week, those 11 days can be.
Yeah.
That was the smoothest, easiest speed weeks I ever went to.
Really?
Yep. Qualified 11th with that car. It drove good, didn't have issues, and ran good in the race. And if I'd really wanted to make a real serious gamble, we still might have won, but I knew it was going to be too close on gas. And I'm thinking, this is a big race. Rick has done an incredible job. Why would we throw away finishing pretty good with the risk of, 30% chance you might win the race and 70% chance you're going to finish 25th?
Yeah.
So let's just stop, get it done and make the deal worthwhile.
Yeah. And how much did that performance that day help lure that partnership with Banquet?
It helped a lot. It helped a lot. But one of the proud things to me, Skull had left and kind of left me hanging, actually. Not in an ugly way, but that's the way it worked out.
Yeah.
They hired Don Perdome, was driving for Skull in Copenhagen, at that time. So after that race,
drag racing.
Drag racing.
Yeah.
Don Perdome came and found me up in that transporter to tell me that he was impressed of what a great job we'd done and just wanted to congratulate me and whatever. And Dale, that kind of stuff really means a lot to somebody.
Really? Yeah.
Because he took the effort to go find me to tell me that.
Yeah.
Because I'd known him through the Skull days.
Yeah. When you're, I guess in 2003, or after 2004, how much involvement in the sport did you have beyond that?
Basically none. My son ran some Hooters Pro Cup races, and we ran ARCA for a year, and he ran a few nationwide races. Or
you were helping with that?
I'd go around some. Yeah, I'd help him with some of it.
Yeah.
And I always tell people the most fun I ever had racing was that Hooters Pro Cup.
Really?
I just enjoyed that. But that's after
It
that's all
probably
the
felt
racing.
like what racing used to be back
Well,
in the
it
day.
was. It's
Yeah.
a one-day deal. You just go do it
Yeah.
all in one day. But that's all in the racing. I don't watch NASCAR. I don't even
You
keep
still
up
don't,
with it.
you don't watch it.
I don't watch
Really?
it. I love Formula One. I don't know why I'm so interested in Formula One, and I like to
Really?
watch those Indy cars.
Yeah. That's a surprise.
And I'm disappointed Max is struggling so bad with whatever.
Yeah. Back-
He's all up. Man, they're struggling. Golly.
So when you walk away from the sport, was it an easy decision?
It's kind of, you. First of all, it's like you hit you a ton of bricks. Say, I'm in business today and tomorrow I'm not. So, we tried for about a year. We worked in marketing trying to find ways to put some programs together. And Dale, you will not believe, and maybe you will, the nut jobs that called you constantly. This guy, I'm coming, I got money, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do, oh, Lord have mercy. We were inundated with that stuff for a year.
Why not go work for somebody like you did with
nobody,
Bud Moore?
nobody ever asked me to. But I didn't pursue it either.
Yeah, you didn't.
No, I didn't pursue it.
Yeah. Would you, might have you stuck around if you had taken a GM job or something at a place like Bud's?
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. At
So-
one point, Roger called me when we had Winston, and he had Marlboro, and we knew that tobacco companies were pretty much getting on the way out. And he said, why don't you just sell that stuff and come back and work for me? And maybe I should have done that, but I didn't.
Man, you continue to live close by. I remember, you had that shop up there on 40 right off
Right.
you get off 77 and go a couple miles, and it's over there on 40. Now I think Front Row Motorsports is in there. Who's in there?
Well, actually, no.
Or is it-
Front Row leased one of them for a long
Yeah,
time.
they
and
did. Who's
some
in there
truck
now?
team is, and a guy named Tim Self bought
Yeah.
one of the buildings. And he builds, he's got a factory of these air machines, and I think there's some steel truck races goes on. But I haven't been up there in 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
You live in Denver with your family where you built the house back in 1986.
Built in '86 when I was working for Hal Needham. We lived in the same house.
And you don't watch a lap of NASCAR.
I mean, if Linda, my wife, would always watch it, I might walk by and see something, but I don't really watch it.
That's crazy.
It's just, I'm just different.
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
just a
You are
different kind of
different.
guy.
You are.
But I've never been a self-promoter,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of, I always felt like if you do your job well enough, and if it's recognition, you'll get it.
Yeah.
You don't have to go out and try to seek it. It'll come to you.
Yeah. Well, man, I always wanted to talk to you. Always kind of curious about, how you viewed your life and your career. And I've you said it, your own words. You are kind of different. You are built a little different. And some people can walk away from something like that they've been doing for decades without a ton of heartburn or heartache, while some struggle, right, finding purpose or finding getting their second chapter going or whatever the next chapter is.
I won't say it wasn't easy, or I won't say it was easy, but it's very frustrating. But I said, that's the hand that's dealt. But one thing that pops up to me, talking about money and sponsorships, it was not until I was out that I realized how much money the manufacturers were putting into these teams.
Yeah.
I knew we had good sponsors, but I told when I was partnered with Carl Haas, I said, I don't know where the money's coming from, but these people spend twice as much money as we spend. And lo and behold, I find out the manufacturers are basically matching the sponsors in most cases. Yeah. And we never had that.
Yeah.
So that's not an excuse, but we were operating pretty competitively on far less than a lot of people were.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I would be pleased, won a championship with Benny Parsons. I think everybody, respected Benny as a broadcaster.
Benny was a better racer than a lot of people realized.
I agree. I think people respected him. I think that they appreciate who he was, a gentleman racer, and a hard racer, could win races, but raced as a gentleman.
He raced within his limits.
He did.
And he did well at that.
He did. Won Daytona 500 and Crew Chief Cale to a couple championships. I mean, your career is remarkable.
Well, thank you.
To be honest with you. And then to go into the car owner side of it, kind of when, I guess in the 70s when you got with LG and you wanted to, you're aspiring to one day be an owner, that really looked like a achievable goal, or the obvious goal. But there was sort of this big odd crossover as you're headed toward trying to be a crew chief or trying to be a car owner. The idea of being a car owner is getting more and more challenging.
Absolutely.
The financial, landscape. There was a lot of money going into the sport around that time when you bought your team and created your team, but it was the sport and the expense of the sport was skyrocketing as well. So to do it like you did and do it as long as you did is really impressive.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Travis. Kind of interesting to see what you've been up to. I mean, when you leave here, where are you headed?
I'll go back home, probably take a nap, go for a walk. If it's warm enough, I might go swimming.
Yeah. What else do you do with your
I
time?
don't do a lot.
Really?
There's always something to do around there. It's something to repair or fix or go somewhere, and I go grocery shopping and
how did you put yourself at 74 years old? How did you put yourself into financial security?
We saved, and just like we built this house in 1986.
Yeah.
I could have built a bigger house, but I saved my money.
Yeah.
Because this is one thing about being in the motorsports business at that level at that time. Tomorrow's not promised to anybody.
For sure.
And I said, we'll save. And we had those properties, we could sell those properties.
Gotcha.
Of course, we still had, we had some mortgages on them, but we still made some money in the sale of them.
Man. Well, I appreciate you coming all this way and talking to us, man. It's been nice getting to know you. I mean, I can't believe one of the guys that's been in the sport as long as you have, for us to have never really sat down.
Well, I was thinking about, man, you must have run through them all if you got down to me.
Shoot. That ain't no way to think about it. I've always wanted to talk to you because, I do know there's people in the sport that I've studied or that I've been around. And I feel like I know most of their career, but you're a guy that I didn't know. I knew you were different, and I didn't really know what made you tick.
Kind of more of I guess, introvert.
Introvert, yeah. But you were successful in several scenarios, and I'm glad you came to spend some time.
I want to say a couple of things about your dad.
Yes, sir.
I think it's just a great guy. Always, everybody respect him. And I remember at Daytona, they had the drivers would have to go to this little hospital thing for whatever check-in before the season started. There used to be that little
like a physical.
right there off inside the fourth turn.
Yes.
So he walks from there, and he comes brushing by me, and I feel something, and he just keeps going, and I reach, and he slid a commemorative knife in my pocket. Just stuff like that he did that for people just because he was either liked them or appreciated them or saying hello or whatever. But that's a part of Dale Earnhardt that people need to know existed.
Yes, sir. Yeah, he was, it's kind of like Junior Johnson. There was always kind of something he was doing behind the scenes, and he didn't need anybody to know about it. He just wanted to be doing what he was doing or thought somebody deserved some recognition or saw an opportunity to be an assist to somebody. The whole, I think he learned that from the industry or, people like Junior Johnson and just being all those people sort of feeding off each other.
But he appreciated what he had and what he had worked hard to earn. I think he really appreciated that. He didn't want to flaunt it. Yeah. He just appreciated being that fortunate and it being in that position, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, I hope you have fun the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming and joining us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, Travis Carter on the Dale Jr. Download. All right, so we're wrapped up on Travis Carter, man. I'm going to tell you that was definitely a different Dale Jr. Download interview. I can hear it now. Some of our critics on the internet will be saying that this one was a little lackluster, but I disagree. You might have to do a little homework to accompany with this podcast. Go back, look at some of the statistics, go on Racing Reference, maybe watch some of the races that Travis was a part of to put yourself in the mindset of a guy like that. I've done that, right? So for me, that was entertaining. And he's under the radar, wants to stay under the radar. Like he's gonna go home. He ain't gonna do nothing. He don't need to do nothing. He doesn't need, I need racing. I need it. And he don't. He don't need it anymore. He's not mad at it. He don't need it. He don't miss it. We asked him if he'd sign the hood on the wall for us to auction off at the end of the year, and he's like, "Where can I sign it where no one will see it?" He just doesn't want any. I'm surprised he come to do the interview, to be honest with you, because I don't think he asked when this show was going to air, and he was disappointed to find out it would be soon. But Travis is different. He said it, and I was glad he did because I didn't know how to say that without insulting him. But he's different. He's always had there's been this sort of thing about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and he had been with some really good teams. He had done good things, won a championship, won lots of races as a crew chief, but he was like the least one. He was under-celebrated, under-acknowledged. Now, people like my dad, right, understood his worth because they would go to him and say, "Hey, I want you to come over here and work with me. I think we'll be better if you come to work with us." He got hired to go to Penske's and get that deal off the ground with Bobby Allison. So, I mean, there's people in the industry that knew his value and knew his worth, but he never really, like when his ownership stuff started sort of falling apart and the opportunities were leaving, he didn't seek out another role. Like, he could have easily been a general manager or a shop foreman or something. He would have been perfect because he knew all the ingredients for success and could have made a little money and sat back and told people what to do. Never hardly had to lift a finger. And done that for a handful of years, probably managing some pretty successful teams, but he didn't seek it, didn't need it, didn't want it. Had somebody called, he might have done it. But 74 years old, kind of another version of one of the old heads from back in the day, just like last week's Buddy Parrott. We had a back-to-back sort of peek into the history of the sport from two totally different personalities, completely different. And Travis wouldn't badmouth anybody. Travis had a great relationship with everybody. And I truly believe he believes that. I don't think, I mean, he did say that Todd Bodine was prone to hit things, but, and that he might not have, Todd might have been a little too worried about making Darrell look bad when he drove the car versus when Darrell drove it. But, for the most part, he didn't get into a bunch of pissing matches or, didn't get into any competitive spats with other crew chiefs or other teams or anybody of any employers. Seemed pretty level-headed. But I wanted to talk to him, never had, and now I have. And now we've checked that box, and he goes into the library with the rest of them. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll do a little homework on Travis and his career and some of the teams that he was involved in. It's always fun kind of dipping back into the history of the sport and watching some of those races on NASCAR Classics, and just always good to peek back at that part of the sport and remember it fondly. But before we get to the white flag, I want to thank Ally for bringing us the guest segment every single week. They do such a great job supporting us here at the Dale Jr. Download, and we're always better off with an Ally. And now that I've had a conversation with Travis Carter, I think I could call him a friend. No matter what you're saving for, whether it's race tickets or a new car, a new home, we're all better off with an Ally. Now let's get to the white flag. Dropping Sunday, and every Sunday, is the Teardown with Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi. You'll want to listen to that show as they cover everything they saw and experienced at Darlington this past weekend. And Denny Hamlin got the job done Monday. It was Labor Day, and everybody else, at least the door bumper clear guys, were all probably drinking and doing nothing. Denny Hamlin was working, getting his podcast finished. Thank you, Denny. Action Detrimental dropped Monday. Dirty Air and Door Bumper Clear came out Tuesday. And obviously you're listening to this show, but also Speed Street with Connor Daly and Chase Holden, that dropped today. Connor got a podium finish for the first time at his new team, and a lot of excitement around him. He'll have some great guests with Pato O'Ward and Scott McLaughlin. And tomorrow coming out is DJD Reloaded, not with Ask Jr. It's going to be Ask Amy this week. And then Dirty Mo Doe comes out. They're going to be handicapping the field and giving you all the best bets for the upcoming race at Atlanta. A new episode of Andrew Curlin Went There. That's a new show. Andrew Curlin Went There. With guest Christopher Bell. That's out on the Next Level YouTube page right now. If you want to go watch Andrew and Christopher have a great conversation. We've got a 5-star Apple review for you from Brett Hogan. Dale does a great job interviewing people who this casual NASCAR fan might not have never heard of, and it makes me want to go back and watch old NASCAR races and relive those great moments. Well, hey, that's what we were just telling you might want to do. You know, Brett is right. When we have a Travis Carter or Buddy Parrott on, as we're talking about these races, man, take a little note. Maybe I should watch that race. You know, I just heard the crew chief kind of talk about it for a minute and give me his perspective and memories on it. Now I'm gonna watch that on YouTube or whatever it may be. The 75 Daytona 500. There's probably a very good documentation of the 75 Daytona 500 and that race and how that won out for Benny Parsons. So you might want to check that out. But I hope everybody has a great week. That's going to do it for me, but don't forget DJD Reloaded tomorrow with Ask Amy. So, yeah, I'll be on that show a little bit tomorrow. And then, we're off to Atlanta. We'll see you.